the executive director of the National Coalition for Health Education and Genetics. Formerly, we called it NECHPEG. And she led several national efforts to promote health professional education and access to information about advances in human genetics. She is a certified genetic counselor. She did also serve as the director of the Genetics and Public Policy Center at Johns Hopkins University, where she led the center's efforts to address policy issues related to advances in genetics and the whole spectrum, laboratory and oversight with public engagement and research. So also, she is the past president of the National Society of Genetic Counselor and a founding member of the American Board of Genetic Counseling. So please join me in welcoming Joan Scott.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Well, thank you very much for the, is that too loud? It sounds loud to me. Okay. Is that better? Thank you very much for the invitation to come speak today. This is my first meeting, time to your meeting, and let me just say, you know where to hold a nice meeting. I'm happy to come back again in the future. My history with the regional networks actually goes back to the original Corn networks, and you don't need to do the math to figure out how long ago that was. So in the first iteration, but I joined HRSA after this very checkered career that you just heard about 2 weeks before the shutdown. So that was my introduction to the federal government. Thank you very much. And from standing from the outside, I always, you know, as a previous HRSA grantee, I always thought HRSA was a little opaque. You know, it was a little, and now that I'm on the other side of the wall, I understand why it is so opaque. So it is a complex agency with a complex mission. So what I was asked today to do today is sort of give you an update about where we are and what we're doing. But I want to step back a moment and put that in a little bigger context. So this is a slide that I borrowed from David Ginsburg at a meeting that was held now a little over a year ago that brought together all of the federal agencies about this whole translational pipeline from discovery to implementation in the clinic, and ultimately what we hope is improving patient and healthcare outcomes. And where all the federal agencies sit in this mandate or in this, you know, pipeline. And obviously HRSA is, you know, way here at the implementation stage. And I have to say, though, that one thing I was pleased to see when I went into the federal government is that despite appearances from the outside, there is a fair amount of crosstalk between the agencies, but each of them does have their sort of own mission and mandate. And we're way down here at the end with boots on the ground in providing services and impacting people's lives. And HRSA is sort of generally thought of as the, you know, the safety network or the safety net for the population in the United States from health, particularly vulnerable, uninsured, underinsured, vulnerable populations. And within the various populations we serve is this whole maternal child health in the Maternal Child Health Bureau. Michael Liu is the head of that, and of all of the maternal child health populations, including children with special health care needs. And it is in with that setting that the Genetic Services branch sits. But if you think about this in a little, maybe in a little different fashion, part of what we do, I mean, our mission obviously is specifically around genetics, but if you sort of look at what HRSA does and MCH Bureau does in general, what we try to do is sort of correct the market forces. So what is it that the healthcare system currently, or the clinical system, isn't able to do, or either what are the populations or the issues that are falling between the crack that HRSA might be particularly suited to try and influence. So that's another way of sort of thinking about how we think about these general broad populations that we serve. The other sort of guiding principle as we think about, what in this very broad area of genetics, what is our particular role that we can play, we have to be very strictly guided by our legislative mandates. And Genetic Services Branch has 3 legislative mandates that guide all of our program making and funding decisions. And the first is within Title V, within specifically the section that requires MCHB to fund special projects of regional and national significance. And in that legislation is language that specifically addresses providing programs or support for genetic disease testing, counseling, information development, and dissemination programs. As far as I'm aware, HRSA is the only agency that has a legislative mandate to address genetic services. And then, right along with that, comprehensive hemophilia treatment centers, and then screening of newborns for sickle cell anemia and other genetic diseases. So this, particularly that first mandate around genetic diseases and testing, that's really the authority that we have to be providing funding around things like what you do. Now, that's a big mandate because genetic testing information, et cetera, is a big area. That doesn't mean the budget equals the size of the mission, but that's the authority to which we look. The second big legislative authority that guides what we do is the newborn screenings, which was originally the screening for heritable disorders, which was later amended to the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act of 2008, and which now, as you know, is up for reauthorization and is winding its way through that process. And in that legislative language, the various agencies have been pointed to, thou shalt do this, that, and the other thing, and I'll come back to what HRSA's role in here is in a minute. And then our third legislative mandate is around the sickle cell treatment demonstration program, which was funded and authorized under the American Jobs Act creation of 2004, which specifically addressed ensuring that individuals with sickle cell have access to disease-modifying therapies. So these are the 3 sort of broad legislative mandates that guide our program making and our activities. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we are doing in each of those areas. And I'll start with the inherited blood disorders programs, which is funded both mainly out of SPRANs, but also the special line item and authority that we have under the sickle cell treatment demonstration program. So there is the National Hemophilia Program. We fund regional collaboratives, or regional structure, and fund hemophilia treatment centers. There's a thalassemia program. We're currently funding 3 programs of that, and the sickle cell newborn screening program, and then the sickle cell treatment demonstration, which is undergoing reconceptualization, which is why the little new is there. So if you look at particularly within the sickle cell arena, the sickle cell newborn screening program currently funds 6 centers and a coordinating center, and this is mainly aimed at the community-based organizations. But then there's also the sickle cell treatment demonstration program, which currently funds 8 programs, and again, the purpose here is to improve access to disease-modifying therapies. So the sickle cell treatment demonstration program, or both of those programs, if you look at it, all of the funded programs do, great jobs, but not too surprisingly, the impact tends to be clustered around those centers that are funded, because that's, there's where the patients are being seen. And so the next funding cycle then is going to a regional collaborative model based very similarly to the regional collaborative model and the hemophilia regional model. And I did not choose this region because that's where I'm here. I borrowed this slide from Donnell Ivey, who's the program officer for this particular project, and he happened to use this region. So the concept is, like with the regional collaboratives, is to have a primary awardee in a region who then establishes relationships with the different states, who then individually within their states are reaching out to the primary care and hematologists within that states, and to set up learning collaboratives within those regions to improve care for individuals with sickle cell. And the three particular goals are to increase primary care providers who are involved, increasing the number of patients seen, and I can't remember what the third one. There's three goals there. So that funding opportunity has been closed and will be announced for what those regions are soon to come. Within the heritable diseases program, or the newborn screening, which is the sort of the overall name for the under the heritable diseases, the Newborn Screening Saves Lives Act, we have HRSA has two major components of that legislation. One is we do staff now the Secretary's Discretionary Advisory Committee on Heritable Disorders in Newborns and Children, and then we have grant-making programs to support state newborn screening programs, awareness and education, and access to coordinated services. So within those activities, as I say, we do staff the Discretionary Advisory Committee, whose mandate is, I'm sure people here in this room are familiar with, is to provide recommendations to the Secretary, first of all, on what conditions should be screened as part of newborn screening or added to the recommended uniform screening panel. But then they also, and that's what a lot of the activities have been over the past years, is around that, doing the evidence-based guidances or the evidence-based reviews around that. But they're also mandated to look at the overall process, newborn screening process, in their ways to ensure the quality, the state capacity and the qualities around those services. So there's a couple of activities that the Discretionary Advisory Committee is currently working a great deal on, and one is this public health impact. So as the committee considers additional conditions to bring on to the recommended uniform screening panel, implementing those conditions, as you well know, is not trivial in states at all. And as the conditions get more complex, we have more point of care testing versus blood spot screening, et cetera. The complexity of implementing these continue to get more complex. And so the committee recently decided that they needed to do a more robust analysis of what is the public health impact of bringing on a new condition onto the RUSP. And so a meeting was held last April, bringing together groups of experts. That report will be coming back to the Secretary's Advisory Committee at the September meeting. That will lead the way for that part of the evidence review, so that the committee will have more robust information around that piece of it as they make their decision. And then the other issue that they're looking at very carefully, of course, is a piece of the newborn screening process, which is how timely are results or samples getting from the hospitals or the birthing centers, and then results to the provider. And if anybody wants more details about any of those activities, just let me know. So that's part of what we do, is staff the work of the Discretionary Advisories Committee. The other part of what we do under this authority is providing grant programs. And these have been varied over the years. Some of it has been to help states implement. So we currently have programs that are funded to help states implement critical congenital heart disease. There's 2 centers that are funded to begin to examine about long-term follow-up within the primary care. And then we just had a funding announcement closed that will provide support to increase the number of states who are implementing screening for SCIDs. The other activities that we fund here is the clearinghouse for the newborn screening. That is up for refunding. That will be announced. The results of that funding opportunity will be announced soon. And then the newborn screening data repository and technical assistance center, which we're happy to announce is APHL received that for the next round of funding for that, and I believe we're going to be hearing for someone about that next. And it is within this area that where the regional collaboratives both support the newborn screening mandate to help states fund, but also begin to bridge into this broader mandate around genetic services writ large. And I won't go into, obviously you guys know what the regional activities look like and how you are doing that here in your region. The National Coordinating Center provides the overall infrastructure support for many of the cross-regional activities, as well as some activities that Mike talked about that they are directing themselves. And then it within that is the National Genetics Education and Consumer Network. So a lot of what we do is directly responsive to some very specific mandates that we have, which leaves very, little bit of the budget left over for everything else in genetics. And HRSA, or the Genetic Services branch, has looked and has funded projects to address more broadly genetics. A couple of the more recent projects was the prenatal and pediatric family history tool, which is an electronic tool that patients could fill out, had algorithms associated with it that would help the provider in either the pediatric or the prenatal center, saying you might want to discuss fill in the blank with your patient because they reported this, that, and the other family history. And then the Genetics and Primary Care Institute, which was developed by the American Academy of Pediatrics. Currently, and the funding opportunity for this closes next week, so if you want to submit a funding opportunity, you might want to leave now and start go writing, and get it through your institution. And don't wait till the last minute to try and get it into EHB, because that's a disaster waiting to happen. Is the reproductive environmental network. And the purpose of this funding opportunity is to provide, again, sort of a regional approach, is to ensure that there is a teratogen information service available in each of the HRSA regions. So that's the intent of that particular funding opportunities. So those are all some of what the Genetic Services branch does and fund, and sort of how we approach thinking about funding going forward. And we're always asking a question. I guess my mandate to you, or my question for you, or what I would want to hear back from you, are particularly with the regional services, the regional collaborative infrastructure, is how can we make best use of you, and what are those big ticket items within the region that would benefit from a regional approach? Have we got it right? Are we doing it right? What could we do better or differently the next time around, and how would that be? And with that, I will stop, and I welcome anybody. Did I get the right? Last couple of times I've talked about this, I've given the wrong phone number, and that was You can call me, but not really. But I do encourage anybody who wants to contact me directly, please do feel free to do so. Any immediate questions?